Hello, my name's Ian Austin and this is Friday Night Fright. The original plan was to do a commentary on Paranormal Activity 4, but unfortunately only 14 minutes of a 85-minute commentary are audible. So going to have to do something slightly different, and which by slightly different I mean I am going to be doing a, for lack of a better word, destruction job on Paranormal Activity 4. Using the 5 cinematic key concepts, or as I call them, the cinematic 5 stages of grief. So yeah, that's going to be slightly different, but the wheel never stops turning on this podcast. So the first of those 5 cinematic stages of grief is going to come up in a second, and I won't say in advance, I'm sorry if you like Paranormal Activity 4. I understand, I like terrible movies too, but something sake of variety going to destroy the movie now. So I will be back in just a few seconds to destroy the movie. Number 1, the plot. Or in this case, what plot? Because I'm sure you guys know by now, these movies and not about the plot. Paranormal Activity 1, there's a ghost that may or may not be a demon, and it's terrorising the house. And there's no progression, don't know what demon wants, because we're trying to create sense that this is based in reality, despite the fact that demons are not part of reality. That's fine. Blair Witch did similar thing, except Blair Witch had progression. Paranormal Activity 1, no progression. Paranormal Activity 2 goes back in time, tries to set up the idea of a loose plot because the demon wants the son of Christy and whatever the name of the father is. Except then you find out that the plot is so convoluted because it's a prequel to the first movie and then ends a sequel to the first movie. Paranormal Activity 3 goes back in time to 1988 to add even more convoluted plot to proceedings. And by convoluted plot, I mean convoluted backstory. But at the same time, despite all of this, not a lot happens in the movie to the last 10 minutes. Paranormal Activity 4 is the same way, except not a lot happens in the last 10 minutes. The problem with these movies, and the first two tried keeping up pretense that these were documentaries being made in a universe where these characters actually existed, and they did a poor job of that because that just makes you think, who would release this? Because this isn't a documentary so much as actual general footage of a murder or murders. It would never be released in cinema. Ever, under any circumstance, so internal logic is destroyed there. But the fundamental problem is the fact that this movie's plot, for lack of a better word, is non-existent. It's clear that they're working off some sort of loose treatment, maybe a couple pages if that, and the rest is improvised. Unfortunately, that does not make for a very interesting movie. I'm sure some of you will be thinking, Ian, how can you say that Blair Witch had even less of plot? And to that I would say, in theory you're correct, but what Blair Witch has is an atmosphere and progression. The characters that start Blair Witch are not the characters at the end Blair Witch, which is going to lead to point number 2, which coming up in a few minutes. But progression is important for a movie. You have to feel like stuff is happening and you're leading towards somewhere. Paranormal Activity 4 does not lead anywhere. It could have ended that way after the first 2 minutes of the movie. It feels like a freewheeling, the equivalent of a cinematic freewheeling jazz solo, or the equivalent of any solo where people cheer because someone can play drums continuously for 10 minutes. Applaud them, they say this is amazing, this is wonderful, but I don't care for it because I like to have a story being told. If a song is sung, there's a story. The drums, the bass, the guitar, the singer, it all meant to flow together. If it's just the singer singing random shit for 10 minutes, Yes, on one hand, impressive, very good, very good. On the other hand, it doesn't have any emotional resonance to me, the viewer. Paranormal Activity 4 is a fine example of that. This movie has no resonance. It's just a bunch of things happening, and by a bunch of things happening, I mean it's a very loose bunch of things happening. And by a loose bunch of things happening, I mean I can point to one specific example in the movie where it all falls apart, and I'll explain that right now. The idea behind Paranormal Activity 4 is that we are meant to be watching the slow progression of slow destruction of a family. That's an idea in theory, but not in actuality, because as I'll point out in a second, it has a fundamental flaw, which is the scene order is not in right order. There's a scene later on in the movie where Alex, ostensibly our lead character, although I'll get how that doesn't work in one of the segments coming up, she's our lead character. There's a scene where she is given sleeping tablets by her mother, and Alex passes out. Now, this is not a problem in theory. You can have a scene like that as long as you've built up to it. But the fundamental flaw behind Paranormal Activity 4 is they not only don't build up to that scene, they put that scene too early in the movie, because after that sequence is a scene where Alice almost dies because she suffocates. She runs through the garage because she's garage door open, and then garage door shuts, the door to the house shuts, the car turns on, and the place comes flooded with gas. After that, she's hysterical with both her parents, on the edge of full-blown hysteria. Now, logically, in a movie, the next scene after that would be her sleep and parents arguing because mother gave Alex sleeping tablets. But that scene's already happened, despite that there's no setup for why it's happening, because prior to that point, she's shown no signs of hysteria or anger or anything. And that's the fundamental problem of this movie. When it finally does latch on something it can use as part of the plot and progression, it uses it too early instead of at the right time. And that's one of the biggest issues I have with the movie and with franchise. The fact that it's clearly a freewheeling, improvised movie, so the only way it fits it is in the editing process. Because there's no set story. They know how it starts, they know how it ends, but the complete second act, it's just a bunch of shit happening. No context, no progression, no logic. So the plot is not there. There's no plot. Stuff happens, but no progression. So if you're making a movie which has no progression, and it's a horror movie, you're failing immediately. Because a horror movie is meant to be the equivalent of a theme park ride, where you get peaks and valleys. Paranormal Activity 4 is a consistent line, and consistent line essentially means that there's no excitement. It's just consistent all the way through. Starts on line, ends at the same point, on maybe slightly above line at the end, because stuff starts happening, but it's just a bunch of noise. So we've concluded that the plot does make any sense, and also there isn't plot. Does make any sense, isn't plot. It's just a bunch of shit happening. And a bunch of shit happening does not an interesting horror movie make. Number 2, acting. Now this is going to be quite a complex one to get into, because it's hard to criticise the actors per se, because they have nothing to work with. You're asking people to improvise. Improvisation, of course, on its own merits is not a bad thing. You will watch movies. I give an example of a movie I think has quite good improvisation. This Is the End. I think, which is the Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg movie about the end, the way of the apocalypse. And it's quite an entertaining movie. I quite enjoy it. I think the improvisation works. But reason the improvisation works is because they're playing against the genre that they're in. This Is the End is essentially a post-apocalyptic movie, rapture movie for lack of a better term, starring actors who are playing against the genre. So it's funny because they know the genre, but they're intentionally going against it. The improvisation is adding jokes and context to an already established plot. The plot is nothing special. The plot is very bare bones, but established and solid structure. So that jokes are working against the structure, but also with the structure. The problem when you make a movie like Paranormal Activity 4, or any sort of Paranormal Activity movie, is that they don't have the solid structure. As I said in the earlier part, it's very freewheeling. It's very improvised. It's to an extent organic, but not in a good way. They are fumbling their way through a movie, hoping they can salvage it in the edit suite. Indeed, a movie like this, you can completely believe, has 4 or 5 different versions out there. And on one hand, that's cool because it gives you choice in the editing room. On the other hand, it's bad because it gives you too much choice in the editing room. Because when you're editing a movie, you should not be making a movie. A movie's been made. When you write a movie, you're writing it. You're providing structure. When you make a movie, you're adding context to the structure. And when you're editing a movie, you're creating the best possible version of the movie that exists. But it has to already exist. Throwing someone, as far as I believe it to be, 5 possible different movies and saying to them, combine all of this, make an 85-minute version of this. That doesn't work. Because they need an idea of what they're trying to make. And essentially, Paranormal Activity 4 boils down to a bunch of scenes happen and then it ends. And inherently that creates a struggle even for the actors. Because the actors clearly in this are trying their hardest to make individual scenes work. And that's admirable. But they don't know where the character's going or where their character's been. Because there's no real continuity between scenes for the actors. Actors are notorious for looking at scripts and thinking, I'm focusing on my character part, that's all that's important. But here there are no character parts. There are no character arcs. So the actors are struggling against that. Because you're asking actors to improvise. And not in a Blair Witch way. Blair Witch, I'll happily admit and acknowledge, and I'm not even a huge fan of Blair Witch, is mostly improvised. But it's simple improvisation. It's not to demean the actors in that movie because they do an amazing job. But you're asking 3 people, 2 guys and a woman, to go into woods and improvise reactions to weird shit going on around them. You're simplifying it so that you're allowing for reasonably complex characterization. But with Paranormal Activity 4, they're not doing that. They're not simplifying it. Because these actors have a variety of weird shit that they're meant to be reacting to, and a crazy universe which doesn't make any sense, and 3 other films worth of continuity to react to. 4 if you count Tokyo Nights, which I don't yet. And you're asking them to pull this off. You're essentially asking them to write and direct as they're making scenes, the actors. And that's asking a lot of trained actors. But your 2 main actors in this movie are a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And you're asking them to carry not only dramatic weight of a movie, there isn't any dramatic weight, but you're asking them to carry it anyway. Not only asking them to carry dramatic weight for the movie, you're asking them to create dramatic weight for the movie. And they can't do it. And that's not their fault. I'm not blaming the 2 main actors of this movie, because that'd be her amazing task for any actor, let alone 2 who aren't that experienced, who are having to make up the shortcomings of director and writer. So there's the acting problem in a nutshell. But the other issue is that the 2 parents who could have had an interesting dynamic, again, get nothing worked with. And actors have to have something to work with. They can't magically fix the movie while the movie's been made. But at the same time, they're getting too much rope. Clearly this was a case of the actors being told, we have a few bits here we need to put in the movie, just make the rest up. And they edited that into a movie. So we get lots of scenes of stuff that doesn't really make any sense in terms of scene to scene acting, character stuff. But hey, doesn't matter. Fuck it. It's Paranormal Activity 4. Who gives a shit if it makes any goddamn sense or if there's any acting continuity? Am I right? Number 3, directing. I don't even know what to say about directing, to be honest. I think the problem really with these movies is they don't feel directed by anyone. They feel produced. They feel like Blumhouse essentially wants a Paranormal Activity movie. That's what they want. They don't want a director. They want an overseer. They want someone to shoot it like the other movies, to have the feel of the other movies. And I bet if I went back and did a proper analysis, the same rough moments would happen in all 4 movies in terms of scares and in terms of when things happen, the appropriate meters of eventness and all of that. They don't want a director, they want an overseer. And problem inherently of that is these movies have no personality. They're production line movies, where the actors come up shit, the overseer says cut, and then they move on. They let the actors hang themselves with the rope that they give them, the improvisation rope, and then they just shrug it off. These movies really all blur into one. It's one of the comments I criticise Paranormal Activity 3, aka Paranormal Activity 1988 on. It's the fact that it doesn't feel like a 1980s movie. It just feels like a production line Paranormal Activity movie. There's no sense that this was shot in the 80s. Despite the fact that they're using cameras. In universe, they're using cameras from the 80s. It just looks like all the other movies. And that's the same thing with this one. It just doesn't, for all the criticisms you level against Paranormal Activity, the first one, Oren Peli, at least that movie created a mini subgenre of sorts. Not a great movie, but it was shot that way, half out of necessity, half out of vague artistic, attempt at making something art housey and horror-y. But this movie just feels like the last two, where, and especially at this point, they're not even trying to pretend this is found footage anymore. Really, you know what I mean? Where it's just, there's no logic behind it. It's just a bunch of shit happening, recorded on, cameras. These families all magically manage to have all these fucking cameras set up everywhere. It's like, they're not even trying to come up with logic for that anymore. It's just, cameras are here. There's a Kinect. It's a bunch of bullshit. And I just, again, horror movies to me, if in terms of directing a horror movie, I've always had belief that there should be at least one moment in that movie where you think this is the director's stamp. And whether it is the director's stamp or not, it should at least feel like there's a moment in the movie. Truth or Dare, terrible movie. Schlock. Funny schlock, but schlock nonetheless. But you remember those awful smiles. Those terrible CGI smiles. I don't know whether that's something the director came up with, but it's a memorable image from the movie. Paranormal Activity doesn't have that. None of these movies have that. They're just shot in the most visually boring way. The acting is, it might not be, it's a combination of things, but the performances aren't inspiring, and the overseer is meant to get a good performance out of people to tell them what works and what doesn't work, and here it's like none of that happens. The composition is boring. the nature of scenes, the shots are boring. Like, for example, the scene near the end where Kate murders Ben and snaps his neck is shot in the most dull, monotonous way possible. It's like they wanted it to go, oh, this is realism. Realism won't be shot in a fancy way. But when your movie is such that it doesn't look like... It looks like anyone could have made it. There's no sense of identity. There's no sense of purpose. There's no iconic nature. There's no scene that distills a message. There's no directorial intent. It's like they just thought, we'll shoot one take of this and then we'll go to lunch. And that, to me, is one of the main problems of these movies. The fact that there's no sense that these are anything other than product. They're just product. They're the equivalent of, I'm drinking Dark Pepsi at the moment. I like Dark Pepsi. I think it's a nice drink. But Diet Pepsis all taste the fucking same. And that's fine for Dark Pepsi. That's what you want with Dark Pepsi. But when you go out somewhere, you want to have a nice drink or a nice meal. If you go to a restaurant, you don't want the meal to taste the same as you make it home. You want it to taste different, because otherwise why would you go to a restaurant? When I watch a horror movie, I want to feel like I'm watching something which succeeds on three levels. One, interesting. Interesting horror movies are great, interesting. And by interesting, I mean something like The Shining or The Witch, where I'm watching someone's interpretation of horror. The Witch, to me, and Shining are not scary movies, but that doesn't mean they don't succeed as horror movies. They're utterly unique horror movies filtered through the personalities and the directorial intent of two wonderful directors. Kubrick may have been directing a movie based on a book, but he turned that book into a movie which has all of the themes and all things that interest him, while keeping the intent and the message and themes of the book. Brilliant. Paranormal Activity 4 is not saying anything interesting. It's not entertaining schlock. Entertaining schlock is fine. Movies don't have to aspire to be art. You can have directorial intent by making directorial schlock. For example, The Faculty, directed by Robert Rodriguez, is schlock. Absolute schlock. But it is definitely a Robert Rodriguez movie. By nature of the acting, writing, deep acting, directing, and the fact that he does, there's little things in this movie like casting Salma Hayek. Salma Hayek and Rob Rodriguez are a great team of actor and director. He gets the best out of her in terms of creating these interesting, fascinating, iconic characters. But that's the thing. People like Rodriguez and Wes Craven, and even Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi, his last horror movie, Drive Me to Heck, or whatever it's called. That movie is dripping with generic genre conventions. And on surface is not a particularly interesting horror movie. But Sam Raimi brings his weird, childlike glee and sense of humour to the movie, which elevates it beyond what it would otherwise be. Sam Raimi makes when he makes horror movies, he knows intrinsically what interests him and what he can bring to material. These directors don't bring anything, as far as I can see, to material that anyone else could not have brought. There's no lifeless movie. It literally feels like it could be directed by anyone. Number 4, writing, or lack thereof. This movie claims that the story was come up with by one person and that 2 people wrote the script. I call complete and utter bullshit on that. you can improvise a lot in a movie and change it in the improvisation process. I'm not saying otherwise. Judd Apatow writes scripts for movies, but with the distinct mindset of, we're going to improvise and add shading to a lot of this. But that's the key. Add shading. He knows what the structure is, where the story starts, where it ends, and how characters progress. Judd Apatow is adding shading to it. And works for some people, doesn't work for others, that's fine. He's not creating on the set out of thin air. Okay? The only people who do a consistently good job of that, the only person rather, is Christopher McQuarrie on Mission Impossible movies. But those movies still have a tight plot and a tight structure. He knows to a large extent where the movie's going and what he wants to achieve. The action sequences and some character stuff is improvised on set. But at the same time, he's working with some of the primost actors on planet, and in Tom Cruise, someone who's played Ethan Hunt through 6 movies and been acting for over 30 years at this point. Tom Cruise knows who Ethan Hunt is, knows who Chris McQuarrie is because they've worked together a lot, and it's bookended by people like Alec Baldwin, Simon Pegg, and Ving Rhames, who all know their characters by this point. And he's also working with someone in Tom Cruise who's very good at stunts and very good at the action stuff. So he's not working with people who aren't used to that environment. Paranormal Activity 4 takes a whole team of new people and throws them together and says, improvise a movie. With no structure, no real plot, no progression, no character arcs, no sense of where it's going. And this is the result. I cannot stress enough how much you need a script, or at very least a treatment, before you start a movie. And who knows, maybe they had treatment. I don't believe they did, but maybe they did. Maybe Blumhouse and people who make this movie, and Jason Blum, maybe they all sat down and they mapped this out. It's not without real possibility they did. But what I would ask is, if they did that, why it doesn't show any signs of that in the movie. This movie was not finished. By no stretch was this finished. This movie was abandoned. This movie was thrown out there to the wolves with no real sense that they made a complete movie. Because it's not a complete movie. In any possible regard, it's not a complete movie. This is a mess from a structure standpoint. As I said earlier, the scene with Alex being given sleeping tablets taking place before the scene where she has a hysteria-based breakdown is inexcusably poor by any stretch of the imagination. That should have been fixed in editing, but at the same time that should have been fixed in production, and at the same time that should have been fixed in pre-production. You make a movie 3 times. You make it in pre-production, you make it in production, you make it again in editing. You have the script is where the story originates. The movie adapts the script, and the editing adapts the movie and finishes it. But if you skip stage 1, you are missing a vital part of the storytelling process. The fact that this movie literally had no character arcs. You watch this movie and Alex is the same person at the start of the movie as she is at the end. I hate Go Back Blair Witch. That didn't have a script. Blair Witch had no script. But they knew where the story was going. They knew what was going to happen. The directors knew. Because Heather at the start of Blair Witch is an optimistic, enthusiastic, aspiring documentary maker. Her character arc throughout the movie is, I am going to keep making this documentary. Despite the fact that it goes on, she starts making it, wanting to make a documentary. By the end of the movie, she's doing it because she needs to document what's happening. The progression, she's an enthusiastic documentary maker, aspiring documentary maker. That's the start. The middle is, she's recording it to show people what is happening. The end, she's breaking down, and literally the camera is all she has left because everything is gone. She's lost everything. That's all she has left. That is the character arc. While it's simply not much happens in Blair Witch, the character is not the same at the end as they are at the start. Alex does not change in this movie. She's the main character and there's no change. She starts one way, she ends another way. That's it. The other possible choice for main character is Wyatt, the adopted son of family. He doesn't change. He has exactly one scene in the movie where you would expect progression or change. Doesn't change. Finds out his name's Hunter. Doesn't change. There's no change for him. There's no progression. The movie needed to be rooted in Alex and Wyatt's relationship and her realising that she is losing him to this new creepy family while parents were unawares. But that's not in the movie because it wasn't written that way. There was no writing. They improvised and they couldn't improvise a through line for the movie. If this was being scripted properly, they would have chosen either Alex and Wyatt or the parents as main characters, but they can't. Alex and Wyatt are predominantly main characters, but it keeps cutting to parents for a subplot which doesn't go anywhere. Parents have marriage issues, which happens on periphery of the scene. And in reality, that's fine. Reality doesn't have character arcs. Despite however much I try to make it, it doesn't have character arcs. But this is not reality, this is a movie. And if Blair Witch, a movie which feels real, can have character arcs, then Paranormal Activity 4 should have character arcs. But that involves writers writing a script, and they have not written a script. And if they have written a script, then pardon my French, they've written a fucking awful script, which should be laughed out of existence. Because there's no character arcs. And dialogue isn't interesting. And plotting makes no sense. You know, if it's improvised, I can kind of understand all of that. I get it. You know, not everyone's a great improviser. But they're let down by lack of a script, or if there was a script, a terrible script. You need a script or a treatment or an idea of where your movie's going. Because if you just get in a car and say, we're just going to drive till we find somewhere, you're going to find somewhere. But you're not going to have any fucking idea where you're going or how you're going to get there. Which is the silliest way of doing it. It's not a good idea. And this is the equivalent to that. Getting in a car, driving, and not knowing where the fuck you're going at midnight. You know, it's just so silly. So yeah, the writing or lack thereof is appalling. And number 5, the franchise. Paranormal Activity 4 was a pretty goddamn successful franchise in terms of money it made. For Blumhouse, it's probably one of their proudest achievements, and rightly so. I mean, it made a lot of money, and in this day and age, getting to 6 movies, 7 movies, that's 7 if you include Tokyo Night, that's a real achievement. But here's the kicker. Is anyone going to remember this movie fondly? And by which I mean, do any parts of this movie, of this franchise, of this series transcend the genre? I would argue no. I would argue that there's been two major horror series in recent memory. The Saw movies and Paranormal Activity. And I want to put them side by side for a moment. Paranormal Activity is about the misadventures of a demon named Toby. What do we know about Toby? Well, he's invisible. He may or may not be a demon, may or may not be a ghost. He has clove feet, hooves for hands, and claws. And he may or may not, and he was once married to an 11-year-old kid. But is any of that interesting? And I'd argue no, it's not. We're 4 movies in, and Toby is a nothing character. It's the only link really between these fucking movies. There's no iconic moments, there's no iconic characters, there's no iconic stories, there's no iconic movies, there's no iconic lines, there's no iconic shots, there's nothing iconic about movies. Saw, on the other hand, the contraptions. Do you want to play a game? There's a line. The little jigsaw puppet and Tobin Bay's performances are all iconic. Jigsaw transcends the horror genre to an extent. Jigsaw would fit right in. Here's the thing. Here's what I'm trying to get at. Child's Play, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, Friday 13th, Halloween, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Chucky, Freddy Krueger, Pinhead. You could stick those 6 characters in a room together and they'd all spark off each other brilliantly. Because they're all distinct personalities, they all have unique looks, they all have unique natures, their movies are all different, and they're all interesting visually. No, they're not the same. They're all interesting. Toby is a nothing character, partly because there's no design for him, and I know what they're going to say. Well, he's invisible, so why would there be a design, you fucking idiot? Okay, well, I posit that he's still invisible 4 movies in, says all I need to fucking know about state of your movies and your confidence levels in your design capabilities. Because if there's anything interesting there, you were fucking shown it by 4th movie. But you haven't, because there's nothing there. He is one of the worst villains in any horror movie. I say that proudly. I say it openly. He's terrible. Terrible villain. Terrible. Because you overcomplicate it way too much with all this bullshit. Where in 4th movie, we still don't know what his plan is. And that's, on one hand, the unknown's scary. On the other hand, Toby is not unknown at this point. It's been 4 movies. And there's nothing interesting, iconic, or scary about him. He's the equivalent of a villain in a TV. He's the fucking equivalent of Silo of Heroes at this point. Where there's nothing interesting. Any interest has been ruined. You know, because it's just more of the same bullshit. And that's the reason that Saw could come back after an absence and have people interested in seeing the movie. And Paranormal Activity will probably come back at some point, but it won't be interesting, and it won't feel like, oh man, shit's getting real. Because no shit happens. There is no shit, and shit that does happen is not real. So as a franchise, it's uninspiring. It doesn't take chances. Again, talk back to 1980s. Friday 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween and Hellraiser and Child's Play. They all took chances. They all branched away from what they first were to try something new. Did it always work? No, but they tried. what is Paranormal Activity trying? It's 4 movies in, it's the same found footage bullshit that you've always done to less results. It just is. That's just it. You could... Red Letter Media did an interesting experiment where you watch 3 Transformers movies back to back, and at roughly the same times in each movie, the same sort of stuff happened. And I bet that's the same about Paranormal Activity. I won't test that theory because I don't want to watch these movies again, but I think that's true. So I think I'm going to be doing the wrap up in a second, and I will summarise my thoughts on the movie as a whole and my expectations for my umpteenth watch of Paranormal Activity 4.5 next week. So that's essentially my destruction of Paranormal Activity 4. The writing, acting, directing, the franchise, everything just poor. Just really poor. Blumhouse predominantly makes 2 types of movies in my experience. Stuff like Get Out, haven't seen, but stuff like Get Out, which is a minority of movies they make, but by all accounts is an incredible movie, award-winning, appraised, applauded, celebrated, and I will be watching it soon, but I'm guessing rightly so. And schlock, stuff like Truth or Dare, which no one expects to win an Oscar. Shit, it's garbage, but it's fun. It's trash, but it's entertaining, and it's got one memorable, iconic moment with those stupid CGI smiles. So I think they've steered away from stuff like Paranormal Activity, because if you watch something like The Purge went in interesting directions. I don't think any of the Purge movies are that good, but to go from Home Invasion to basically The Punisher to essentially a presidential assassination attempt movie to a prequel, that's pretty ballsy. You know, that's going against what Purge is and try and change it in something different. And okay, it boils down to the same sort of thing, but in terms of genre, it feels like each movie is slightly different, and that's good. These don't feel slightly different. This feels like, oh, we're doing the same thing to lesser extent, and we did. One of my favourite horror... I'd say favourite horror movies. One of my favourite franchises in horror is actually, surprisingly, Blair Witch. Although I don't think Blair Witch Project or Blair Witch are that great. I like the fact that the Blair Witch Project, even first one, is a really grim and gritty, sort of very found footage, very realistic, very much movie found footage people could have actually found, you know. And it's creepy, and it plays on what you're not seeing rather than what you are seeing, and it feels realistic and painful and tough to watch. And then Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows is batshit insane, but there's a fascinating concept of your mind playing tricks on you. Have you done what you think you've done, or is there actually some manipulation going on from an external source, or are you just crazy? That's terrifying. Because in theory, everything you see is what you believe you see, but is that what you're actually seeing? Or is your mind playing tricks on you? That's a fucking terrifying concept. Not a very good movie, although I love it because it's schlock, but terrifying concept. And then Blair Witch, the recent sequel, which is an attempt to make Blair Witch Project into the VHS style, where it's a bit nastier, a bit grimier. Not as nasty as I would have wanted it to be, a bit more grimy, because I would have loved a proper VHS 2 style Blair Witch movie, but it's a pretty good movie, all in all. Not great, but decent. So you've got that, and it's all 3 movies feel different, and that's great. You shouldn't make a conventional sequel. You need to change things up, and Paranormal Activity 4 doesn't. It thinks it is by having the lead characters be 15 years old and 11, but it's not changing up very much. It's still the same boring shit happening or not happening, as the case may be. And the next one probably is the one I enjoy the most, I guess you'd say, because I feel like Paranormal Activity 4.5, the marked ones, is trying to do something different. I don't think it entirely succeeds, but we'll be getting on to that next week. But I'd say, on the whole, I think these movies are just shoddy. I'd never say worst horror movies I've ever seen, because I've seen Feeding Frenzy, which was literally 80 minutes of people fucking about in the desert while terrible effects come out and a off-screen monster comes after them. Non-off-screen monsters, they're trying not to show it so they can't afford it. An off-screen monster because they're making an atrocious horror movie and it's literally pissing about for your friends in the middle of nowhere main shit. But hey, you can't win them all. So I'd like to apologise if anyone's expecting commentary. I'll be working on doing one for Paranormal Activity 4.5 for next Friday, and at some point I'll go back in and fill in the Paranormal Activity 4 commentary for completion sake. But for now, here's my destruction job, Paranormal Activity 4. I'll see you next week for 4.5, and remember, life is beautiful.